Hey, Dave Melinda here, Positive Polarity Podcast. Hope things are going awesome for you. As you know, each week I try to find these awesome people from around the world. And we had to travel to Colorado this week. And oddly enough, I found one of the few left in the world that actually likes snow. So I'm born and raised in the Midwest. Recently got a house in San Diego. So we're all ready to go to the warmth for the winter. She's ready to go to the cold. So don't hold that against her. But we do have some pretty cool stuff to talk about today. And I want to start with a two-part question, thought, concept. And I want to know if you agree with this or disagree. And the first part is your life is a reflection of the choices that you've made so far. And I thought about that and I was like, wow, that seemed pretty darn accurate. So I want to dig into that. But the real power was the second part of that, because that means that moving forward, will better choices for you actually lead to a better life? So I'm really excited to talk about that today. I'm honored to be hanging out with Bobbi Kahler. How are you today?
I'm doing fantastic, Dave. Thanks for having me here.
Absolutely. So you are a self-leadership coach from Kahler Coaching. Tell us what in the world's going on over there.
Yeah. So basically self-leadership is all about how do you lead your own life?
Okay.
Right. Because it's, to me, and I think this comes from the reflection of our choices, that story there is, we're not just here to live our life, we're here to lead it. And if we really want to get what the most out of our life and what we want from it and not be passive, that's what we need to do. And there's a lot that goes in to leading ourselves. So that's kind of what that's all about.
Cool. Yeah. We're having, I laugh. I say, man, I got a hard enough time leading myself. Why do I want to lead a bunch of other people, So, but I love that. So thanks again for hanging out. You're an author. And so fill us in on your book. What's that about?
That's called Travels of the Heart, Developing Your Inner Leader. And it actually came out in 2010. And it's a compilation of very short stories followed by journaling questions.
Oh,
and the reason for that is it's a proven methodology for helping someone develop themselves. And it's all centered on leadership, like know yourself, choose yourself, and then give yourself, which is an emotional intelligence framework. So that's what that was all about.
Wow. So like 3 minutes into it and you're already using a swear word. Entrepreneurs hate the word journal. Come on.
I know they do.
It's like, oh my gosh, right away. So if you're listening, just hang on for a little bit. Okay?
Don't turn it off. You
Don't
can
hold
just
that
reflect
against her.
too. You can reflect.
Okay, reflect. Yeah, there you go. That's awesome. So don't journal, you can reflect. And I
That's
reflect
right.
a lot while I'm driving. So that's, totally makes sense. So kind of take us back to wherever in your journey you feel comfortable, because this started earlier in your career and all of a sudden there was kind of this defining moment that you had. So fill us in on that, because I'm guessing, Bobbi, that there probably are people listening right now that might be at that crossroads. And
Okay.
that's the person. And again, if there's one person today, that's fantastic. That's all I need to reach is one person. But I want you to kind of share with us what that crossroads looked like for you, because it's such a cool story.
Yeah. And I love what you said there, because there's probably someone at a crossroads. And I think that's why I do this. And because that's the person I want to help. So I love that. So one of my crossroads in life was when I was 23 and I was working
Like
two
what,
jobs.
3 years ago that
3 years ago. It wasn't very long. Yeah, thanks. So a long time ago, but I was 23. I was working two jobs. I I always call it like the year I lived out the country music song. And I say that, and I'm a country music fan, but
Sure.
it was not a good year for me. And the thing was, I'd never gone to college because my parents didn't believe in college.
Okay.
And so I wanted to go to college, but back then it was very hard to get financial aid, especially because my dad made enough money where technically he could have afforded it.
Sure.
And that was just their decision, and that's fine. So I was 23, it was New Year's Eve. And I got home from working my two jobs, and it's like midnight and I'm all alone in this little dark apartment, and I'm sitting on the couch and I'm thinking, how did my life turn out this way? And And the answer that came back to me was, your life is a reflection of the choices that you've made so far. And total transparency, I was not pleased with that answer, because I think I really wanted someone or something that I could point to say, well, it's because of that or because of them. And I realized it's not. Nobody was going to come and knock on my door and rescue me. No
Right.
one. That was up to me. And I think when that sank in, after the first, I don't know, a few seconds or a minute, whatever, it actually became very, very hopeful, because what I realized is that if that's true, that my life is a reflection of the choices that I've made so far, what that means is that if I learn to make better choices, I can get a better result.
Sure.
And that's when I poured myself into studying things like leadership and communication. And we didn't call it emotional intelligence back then, but now that's what that body of work is about. That's what led me to eventually, I left my small town that I was living in, because the best job in that town, one of the best jobs, was working at the Tyson poultry factory. And I thought, I don't know what I can do in this life, but I want to do more,
Sure.
So I left my hometown. I relocated. I got a good job so I could afford to put myself through college. I did that. I went on to my master's, and it's all in this field of human flourishing. So, positive psychology, performance psychology, that type of thing.
Well, and thank you for sharing that, because, and I kind of want to go back to something that you said, because I wrote down how easy it is to blame other people, right,
Yeah.
for our situation. And boy, I tell you, nothing, not to get into politics, it's just that seems like that's like the common theme right now, is let's blame somebody else. And it's so easy to look outward. I can blame my competition, I can blame my team, I can blame my leader, I can blame the government, I can blame my spouse, I can, my gosh, they're
Anybody.
endless, right? And it's so rare for people to start with themselves. And that's why I love doing EQ work and talking about emotional intelligence, because the self-awareness piece, it starts with us. And it's so easy to say, if I only had this, like for you, it would have been, how easy would it have been for you to say, blame your parents and say they didn't, provide school, therefore, I didn't turn out how I wanted to. It would have been really easy to take that path. So how did you kind of navigate that and not go down that path that tends to be the easier path to go down? I'm just curious how that worked for you.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I love that you called that out, because here's how I view it. When we blame others, I think that we're giving away a big piece of our own power, right? Because think about it. If we say to ourselves, I don't need someone to come rescue me, I can do that for myself. That is an incredibly empowering place to operate from. That's just what I believe. But the other part of that is, how did I not go down that path? I don't think I was raised that way. Like, I grew up on a farm, I worked hard my whole life, and it wasn't like I was making bad choices. They just weren't going to lead me to someplace new. But one of the things that I think this came from both my mom and dad, and, when I had a health crisis later, it really reinforced it, is that there's no point in arguing with why I am where I am. It is what it is. Now, what do I do?
Yeah.
And so to me, to spend time blaming my parents, I just don't think it occurred to me, because what's it going to change?
Sure.
It's not going to change anything.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty rare, because most people are looking outward so much to blame other people or other situations. So that's so cool that you had that. I mean, you mentioned that you had a health scare. So whatever you feel comfortable sharing with the audience here today, we'd love to learn, because it really turned into some positive things in your entrepreneurial journey. So how did that work for you?
Yeah, I'm happy to share about it, because I hope others can learn from this.
Sure.
Because I started my own business in 2000. And anyone who's listening that's an entrepreneur, we all know, like, you put everything in your hearts, everything in.
Yep.
And once again, I started making bad decisions because I was so focused on the business that I stopped eating as well as I should have.
Mm.
I cut corners on my sleep. And essentially in March 6th of 2003, I collapsed.
Mm.
And what had happened is apparently I had mono at some point, like 9 months prior to that, but I pushed through it. I just thought, well, I'm a little bit tired. Buck
Sure.
up, right? We all get tired. That was my self-talk, which is
Sure,
not
sure.
healthy.
Yeah.
And so it led to a collapse where I've had doctors tell me, like, one doctor told me, he's like, I don't even know how you're still alive.
Wow.
That's the condition I was in.
Sure.
One doctor, 6 months in, he said, Bobbi, he said, based on what we know, we think that you probably have like a 3% chance of a full recovery.
Wow.
And it took 18 months, Dave, to find the doctor who said, I can help you.
Wow.
And she warned me, she's like, it's going to take a while, because you didn't get to this place overnight. You're not going to be healed overnight, unfortunately. And I'll tell you,
a pill, Bobbi, just take a pill, right?
There was no pill. That was, there was nothing, and it was at the Oregon OHSU. The doctor there told me, he's like, Western medicine can't help you at this point, because there's no pill for it. There's no surgery that's going to fix it. And I remember when I found Dr. Barb, she's the one that, 18 months in said, hey, I can help you. God, this was painful. I remember I said, when she told me that, I leaned in, I'm like, well, you just tell me what to do, because I can push through anything. That was my signature strength. And she looked at me for a long moment and she said, that's exactly what got you sick. And what got you sick will not make you well.
Oh, no.
And I thought, well, now what?
Yeah.
That's what I know how to do.
Right.
So it was, man, it was a journey.
Well, I tell you, that speaks to a ton of entrepreneurs right now, because you know what? My dad said, just rub some dirt on it, play through it, play through the injury. I mean, if your limb isn't hanging there, you should be back in the game, whatever the game was, And
That's
I think
right.
when we take that over into business, I think that's really can be very destructive, because, number one, we forget about our own situation and we sleep less, eat bad, whatever, which you're talking about. But number two, I think, which is equally as scary, is the team around you. If you're building a team, then they feel that they have to operate at that speed. And, I've done my share of overnighters, all-nighters, thinking I was, but I always was like the next morning, Bobbi, I'm always kind of looking around for, where's the badge? Where's my badge of honor? And the business never says, hey, thanks, Dave, man, that was so amazing. Take a couple days off to recuperate. It's like, no, go home, shower, and come back, I mean, so I really appreciate that piece, that health is important in the decisions that you make. How does the athlete parts creep into your life on this?
Oh, this was the first doctor 6 months in who said, you have about a 3% chance of a recovery. I remember I looked at him, because I'd always been a runner. I've always been an athlete.
Okay.
And so he tells me this, and I don't know if I'm dense, hard-headed, what, but he told me that. And I said, okay, but when can I go for a run again?
Yeah.
And he looked at me and he's like, Bobbi, he said, I think you might have to accept that your days of being an athlete are over. And I just remember thinking, no, I've always been an athlete.
Yep. I
will always be an athlete. I don't know how that's going to happen, but it will happen. And yesterday, you mentioned I'm from Colorado, and I have one of my homes in Colorado, and we live right across the road from Rocky Mountain National Park. So when I'm here and it's not snowing, road cycling is my jam. Okay. And it's a beautiful place to road cycle in Rocky Mountain National Park, And so I went for a ride yesterday. It was my single fastest, strongest ride that I've done. And it's not flat, let me just tell you. So it's just like, it just fuels me, So and here's the thing though, too, because of that, because I had to overcome that, it doesn't matter if I have a slow ride, who cares? I'm out there riding. So it doesn't matter.
Wow, that's so cool. How did you get the EQ, emotional intelligence piece that you referred to earlier, Bobbi? How did you get, is that just a natural when you're talking about self-leadership, that they seem to go really hand in hand. So kind of help people that might have heard that term, whether EQ, emotional quotient, or emotional intelligence, help us understand a little bit what that means and what your research has uncovered there.
Okay. So I think it flows very naturally. So this was back in 2006. Well, I'd read the book of Daniel Goleman's, 1998. I think that book came out.
Yep.
And then in 2006, it was an international conference on emotional intelligence. And I got to hear from some of the real thought leaders. And then eventually with my grad program, I got to study with Richard Boyatzis, who has written books like Resonant Leadership. And he's one of the big researchers in emotional intelligence. So it was something I just became very intrigued by because it does fit so naturally. But it really begins, the very first thing is self-awareness.
Okay.
Because if we're not aware of ourselves and our emotions and what that's telling us, then we're missing out on data points. And like, I think a lot of entrepreneurs, I think we're good at trusting our gut. Right. And I think we have the potential to be good at trusting our gut because sometimes we ignore it. So when we become really self-aware, like our energy, like how we're feeling about something will even guide us to, is this a good project for me? Because I bet you everyone listening has probably had that where like we take on a project or a client and we're like, oh, I don't know about this. And then we end up thinking, oh man, why did I do that? So it begins with that self-awareness. Because if we're not self-aware, we can't do anything to correct, right? We're just kind of going down a path. Gotcha. So self-awareness is first. The second piece then is self-management, right? If I'm leading a team and I am frustrated with someone, how do I deal with that? Do I lash out or do I say, hey, you know what? I'm feeling really frustrated. Why? And then addressing that in a calm way. Here's a great example of emotional intelligence. Roger Federer, and I'm so bummed that he's retired from tennis because he's my favorite. Yeah. When he was, I think, 14, he was amazing at tennis, very poor in emotional intelligence. He'd break rackets. Think about how John McEnroe used to act, right? That was how Roger Federer was. And at 14, he had this epiphany around, I'm never going to be great until I control the inner game.
Gotcha.
What's in his head.
Sure.
And that's what he dedicated himself to. And actually there's a fabulous book called The Inner Game of Tennis by Tim Galway. Okay. Tim Galway used to be a professional tennis coach. And in that book, he says, the greatest opponent we face is not the one on the other side of the net. Yeah. It's the one on our side of the net.
Sure.
And that's what emotional intelligence helps us do. It helps us manage ourselves. So we become aware and we manage ourselves. That's what it does.
And who was the guy just not too long ago, Bobbi, that, they didn't even show the match. They just showed him breaking his rackets. And I don't remember who that was, but
I don't either.
Interesting because, Sports Center focuses on that, right? As opposed to maybe the bad he struggled through. I'm assuming he lost because he probably would have did that if he won. But you know what? We all have that, that probably in us at times. And to your point, how well do you manage that?
That's right.
And that's really, and there, there's times that I'm sure there's so much emotion and, they've played and practiced so long to get to this spot and to finally have that finality of it being over, it just overflows. And, so I don't want to justify and rationalize what he did. I think that in business, it's the same way as what do you do when you lose a good client? What do you do when you lose somebody on your team, a contract, whatever, that next kind of action really shows how your EQ is because that to me is in the past, I'm a really competitive person. So in the past, I would immediately, like most people, go, well, I'm glad I lost that. I didn't want it anyway. I had to lie to myself,
That's right.
Kind of, lay that out there and, oh man, I'm so glad I didn't get that customer. It's like, what? Don't lie. Just be real, man. This is painful. So
it's painful. It's okay that it's painful, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And Dave, I wanted to say too, what you're kind of getting to there is the emotional intelligence can go hand in hand with like positive intelligence, also known as mental fitness.
Okay.
So mental fitness is the definition of mental fitness is our capacity to respond to life's challenges and opportunities with a positive mindset rather than a negative, neutral, or stressed mindset. So when we get that setback, how do we respond?
Yeah.
When some adversity happens, how do we respond? And it begins with, number one, understanding that we can somehow turn this into a gift. We might not know how now.
Right.
That's okay. I didn't know how I was going to turn a life-threatening illness into a gift.
Sure.
That took years. But
Sure.
the other thing that happens, and I think that high performers are prone to this, is neuroscientists have identified 10 saboteurs, inner saboteurs, that we all have.
Okay.
The universal is the judge. And this is the person that's always telling us that we're not good enough, we came up short, all that kind of stuff. And then so we have these what's called accomplice saboteurs that work in conjunction with it. And these are the things that tell us lies about our own performance. So if we make a mistake, it's like, oh, you goofed up again. You're never going to be good at this. You shouldn't even try, marketing or LinkedIn or whatever, because you're never going to be good. And it stops us.
Yeah.
So understanding, and there's a great assessment. It's a free assessment. I'm happy to share the link where you can take it and you can find out which saboteurs do I have and how do they show up for me. Wow. It is extraordinarily powerful, extraordinarily powerful.
Love it. Forget the listeners at this point, Bobbi. I need that. So then that link, we'll put it in the show notes for sure. Well, and I think how cool is that though? I mean, how empowering is that to realize that you can go positive or you can go negative? When I started my company, Positive Polarity, 10 years ago, it was because I really saw this missing spot, like you're talking about, of being positive in the workplace and being positive in life. It's so easy to go negative. I mean, how much stuff is negative today? So I like the control that I have. I'm a control freak. So I want to control my emotions and control that. Hey, I'm at this precipice. I can either go one way or the other. I'm at this decision spot. So if I'm going to invest energy, why not make it positive rather than negative? Because I know once I go down that negative road, man, it's really hard to deviate back to the positive road, isn't it? I mean, that's really the hard spot to be.
It really becomes that downward spiral, and it's like this vortex that's sucking us down, and it's hard to get out of it. And more than that, and I think really importantly, is when we're on that negative path, when we're caught in those negative emotions, what neuroscientists know, and you can see this on fMRIs, the parts of our brain where we have the most creativity, we learn better, we grow, we can negotiate better, we communicate better, all those positive things. When we're in that negative state, we literally do not have access to those parts of our brain. So we're taking away our best mental resources when we're stuck in that negative trap. It's incredible the way when we learn how to use our brains to our best advantage. And we live in such an exciting time because neuroscientists, like in the last 15, 20 years, they've made tremendous advancements and they continue to. So it's incredibly exciting.
Wow, that's cool. And I think that we talked DISC prior to jumping onto our call, and so we used the personality profile assessment called DISC. So you took it, and so what were there a couple things that like stood out for you there?
Well, I'd say number one, the high D. I've taken DISC many times, Dave, and I'm like, and sometimes I don't want to be a high D all the time. I'm like, I want to be the other ones, I think maybe that's the way that's common, but it's like, nope, that is a constant. The other thing, and I shared this with you earlier, is that this time I scored a high I, which I have many times as well, but the C came in low for me this time. And there have been other times, and I think it's probably depending on the role I was in, where that C was high. So it's interesting to me how we can flex in our lifetime. And here's a question for you on this, because I typically do not score high on the study. Okay. Now my husband, he's a very high S, which is great. Now in my family, like with my sisters, there's no S's so I find in those situations, I'm the steady one. And then I go back to my husband and I'm like, can you believe I'm the steady one in this group? But
Yep.
can that happen where it's like you kind of step into that?
Yeah, what's interesting is, so for people listening, D is just a driver. Again, make super simple analogies here, results oriented. To me, the I is a super people person, always talking, always, got something great going on, positive, emotional person. S is a real steady person, very accommodating person. And C, to me, in my mind, I think of an engineer, very fact oriented. So, you look at everybody kind of falls into one of those four. And I think to your question, Bobbi, is that I'm a black or white person. So I think of either black or white. So as I get older, I'm realizing that, there's strength in the gray, so to speak. And so people tend to think like if they're a high something or a low something, it's like an all or nothing. Like for me, I'm a really low C, which means I do not like attention to detail. I have my producer, Dana, does a fantastic job of doing all this stuff for me. So all I do is press the button, talk to awesome people like Bobbi, and then boom, out comes this fantastic episode that goes all over the world. I just think that, the black or white of me thinks, well, I don't have it. So you have the S. It's just that it comes out only when needed. You don't necessarily lead with that S card, but you have it. And that's what I think is unique, is we all have these things. It's just that what do we lead with? Like when you walk into a room with a bunch of people, are you going in as a servant? Kind of, you want to be in the background serving people, or are you like wanting to be in the center of attention? And again, it could depend. If you're delivering a keynote speech, you better not be in the back hovering in the back, because that's not going to work, right? But if you are supporting somebody else, if you're at a graduation for somebody else, you're there to support them. So people can do them all. It's just what do they lead with? So
that's great.
Yeah. So, well, hey, your husband's super accommodating. So does he, like, when you guys say, where do you want to go for dinner? Does he like, I don't know, honey, where do you want to go? Is that kind of his? Or
yeah.
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 There you go.
Oh my goodness. I don't want to decide.
Yep. And then high D's like, all right, we're going here. And then now, that's awesome. Usually. So again, the generalities, but I was curious, what advice do you have for somebody right now that's listening that might feel stuck? We talked about that before, or they want to make a change. They're in a spot they don't want to be. I don't know what the right words are for the person that's listening, but if you're in a spot, that's what I'm going to use my words, Bobbi. If I'm in a spot that I just don't want to be there, whether it's a relationship or it's a habit, it's a behavior, it's something where I just don't want to be there. What are some things that you would suggest for me to be able to kind of work my way through that, or out of it, or at least recognize a little more what's going on there?
Yeah. So I think of it like in the spot or when we feel stuck, right? I think number one, become aware of what you're feeling, right? Nothing happens without the awareness.
Sure.
And then there's something I talk about. It's called learn your way forward.
Okay.
And because here, well, let me back up 1 second. One of the mistakes that I've seen people make when they feel stuck is they think, I can't do anything because I don't have the whole plan. That is not your friend. That type of thinking is not your friend. Okay. So instead, I like to say, learn your way forward. And it breaks down to, I call it the AAA. So it's act, assess, and adapt, right? So the first thing is to take one action. I don't care how small that action is. It can be, I'm going to do research on whatever, or I'm going to talk to someone about this, or I'm going to, whatever that is, I'm going to read a book on it, listen to a podcast, don't care. Take one action, just one that you think is going to move you in the right direction. And then after you take the action, you want to stop and you want to kind of assess and say, okay, how did it go? What did I learn? If it went well, great. How can I get more of that? If it didn't go so well, applaud yourself.
Blame for somebody else.
No, don't do that.
Oh,
whatever
sorry.
you do, don't
wrong
do
show.
that.
Sorry about that. Wrong show, Bobbi. Sorry.
Yeah. But no, if it doesn't go well, and you know what? Applaud yourself if it doesn't go well. You took an action.
Yep.
That's awesome. You took an action. So,
Right.
but if it doesn't go well, that's okay. Say, hey, it didn't go as well as I wanted. So what can I change?
Right.
Right? What could maybe get to a better result for me?
Sure.
And then finally, the third A is to adapt. What will I change? What am I going to change, and how am I going to try that in the future?
Yep.
So simple example, this happened many years ago when I was one of the early jobs I had before I went to, was trying to pay my way through college. I was an assistant manager at a Wendy's, and I actually loved it because I loved leading people and all that kind of stuff. But I realized, like, oh my God, my communication is really bad. Like, I was not a strong communicator. And I was very aggressive in my communication. I learned that from my mom, and I had to kind of learn. Yeah. And it's like, hey, not everybody likes that. Surprise, surprise. So I thought, okay, well, I want to work on this. So at the end of every shift, I sat down, and I'm going to use that swear word again, but for me, it worked. I journaled.
Sure.
You could also just
Okay.
reflect.
Sure.
I journaled about what went well in my interactions today. What didn't, because if it went well, I wanted to duplicate it.
Yeah, for sure.
And I also said, what didn't go well? And then I thought, okay, so it didn't go well. Why? Where was the breakdown? And then I thought, okay, well, what could I do differently in the future? And then I did that consistently for, I don't know, 6 months, whatever. And that's how I really began. But here's what I didn't understand why this was powerful.
Yeah.
When we ask ourselves that question, what would I do differently in the future? And we start to visualize it like, oh, in this case, I could have done this instead of that. We are actually building mental muscles so that in the future, when those situations arise, or similar situations,
Sure.
we're prepared to act, because the brain doesn't know the difference between something that's real like that and something that we've just thought about. Like, classic test, it was basketball players,
Sure.
right? And they took basketball players, and they had 3 groups. One group, they were practicing free throws. All they did, they stood at the line, they took the free throw over and over and over again. Another group, they did the mental exercise of standing on the free throw. They never had held the ball in their hand. They just visualized themselves making the shot. Another
Okay.
group didn't do anything, whatever.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
the group that didn't do anything, surprise, surprise, they didn't get any better.
Yeah.
The surprise, amazing. But now here's the surprise. The group that practiced with the ball, they got better by, I think it was like 24%.
Okay.
The group that never touched the ball got better by 23.5%.
Wow.
Stunning.
Yeah.
Imagine if you did both those things.
Sure. Sure.
So that's why that type of activity is so powerful.
Wow, that's so cool. Well, and you started with ACT, and I have to say that right there, if you're listening and you get off of dead center, so to speak, that's huge.
Right.
Because someone told me the story about how hard it is to start a train. If you start a train at a dead stop, the amount of momentum or the amount of energy that it needs to get started versus stay in motion once it's going, there's a huge difference there. And so people listening right now, Bobbi, that are like, the hardest thing is that first step. I mean, it's crazy how hard that is. But I think, like you just said, you act, and then you assess, how did it go? And then adapt. So I think if you're listening, I just want to encourage you to take that step. And we always talk about course corrections here, and they're just little course corrections. It doesn't mean you're going to have this gigantic revelation, life-changing thing, that first step, right? I mean, how small a steps are we taking here? I guess I just want to encourage the listener right now.
It can be a tiny step. It's just something to get forward, to get your progress started. Like, on my journey back to becoming an athlete, because it took a long time. I mean, it did. It was almost a 10-year journey from beginning to end. And I remember at one point, the doctor said, you're well enough where you can start, going for walks again. And I made it to the end of my driveway, which was, I don't know, 20 feet long at the time. And it was flat.
Yeah.
And I made it back inside the house, and I was trembling and I was sweating. I mean, it was so hard for my body.
Sure.
And I thought, okay, well, that's what I could do today. Tomorrow, I'm going to take one more step.
Sure.
And that's what I did. Every day I thought, and if I was too tired or too sick, I didn't do it.
Yeah.
But on the days when I felt well enough, I thought every day, if I just take one more step than I did the day before, it's going to lead me to where I want to go. And in a way, it was a leap of faith, but it was absolutely right.
Wow, that's
You
awesome.
know, and
Yeah.
it's just get moving.
And I think that there's, the people listening, if this is speaking to you, I think that what that first step is.
Mhm.
And so, we're just here to encourage you to do that. And I think that's the cool part about this type of medium here is we're just able to share what's going on, what worked for us. Bobbi's
Mhm.
able to share what worked for her. And we never say you got to do it this way. The
Mhm.
reality is you probably know what that first step is. And so we're just here to encourage you. I've run many triathlons in my life, and it's funny because you go from nobody cheering you on to all of a sudden you turn a corner and people you don't even know are cheering you on. And boy, I tell you what, there's something inside there, Bobbi, that's just like, man,
Yeah.
if they think I can do it, they don't even know me. They don't have any clue. I got to do this now, And
That's
so
right.
that's where I just want to come alongside people. That's what I do for in my careers. I just come alongside people that are struggling with whatever in their business. So,
Yeah.
that's why Bobbi and I are here. And so I want to encourage you to be able to, jump on a call, check out her website, do something, just whatever that first step is. And if people want to learn more about you, Bobbi, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Best way is, I'd say two, either through my website, bobbikahler.com, or I'm very active on LinkedIn. I post a lot of content on these topics because,
Sure.
and I post it because I just want to share and I want to support people through that. So either one of those are great ways to reach out.
That's awesome. And we're going to end with asking Bobbi Kahler's tip of the week. What would that be for
Ooh.
anybody listening?
Okay, so thinking about the conversation we've had, here's my tip of the week. Do something that you'll regret. And I don't mean like a values breach, right?
Uh-oh.
But do something that you might fail
The
at.
views of these guests are not necessarily this podcast. Is that how that goes?
But seriously, some of
Yeah.
the stuff that you've learned the most from, Dave, it comes from some of the things we failed at.
Yep.
Right?
Absolutely.
So push ourselves, like just go for it. So that's the tip.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. Well, thank you so much again, Bobbi, for hanging out. And again, for the people listening, I just, rather than jump into your next podcast or jump into your next, task, whatever that is, just take a minute and let it sit. And if it's really kind of burning inside and it's just there's something there, I just want to encourage you to reach out to Bobbi because she loves working with solopreneurs. She loves that self-leadership piece. And if realistically, if Tiger Woods needs a coach and John McEnroe, all these people that we talk about and we emulate as professional athletes, if they need a coach, it's entirely possible that you might need one as well. So thank you so much for carving out this time, Bobbi, and can't wait to learn more from you and all that you're doing. I appreciate everything.
I appreciate that too. So thank you. And hey, Dave.
Yes.
Can I add one thing too? Just
absolutely.
To piggyback on what you said there.
Yeah.
If someone wants to take that Saboteur assessment, I'll send you the link. It's super easy. And just as a thank you for your listeners,
Yes.
if they just want to have a 1 hour free coaching session, no strings attached, I'll help them process what they learn on that and just pour value into it. So happy to do that for your listeners.
I'm in. All right. I'm your first one because I think I might have a saboteur. I can't even spell it. Okay. So we're going to have to come up with another name because I don't know. I don't use words I can't spell, but I'm sure there's one there for me. So thank you for that. And again, if you're listening, take advantage of that because that's a fantastic opportunity. So awesome. Well, we will report our findings soon. Thank you again for hanging out with us.
Thank you.